at the live event. There's no fire drills planned. If you need medical attention, make yourself known. We have a first aider in the audience with us. We do have some nourishment after the talk, so we will try to keep Derek to time. But when he finishes, there will be time for questions and answers. So if you're here with us in the theatre, just wait till we come around with the microphone so that everybody can hear you. And if you're online, please submit your questions and we will read them out so that everybody can hear them. And the email's there for those questions. The event is being recorded and the recording will be available later on the website in various forms. So, without further ado, let me say a little bit about Derek. Hopefully I can embarrass him a little bit here. Derek is a senior lecturer in design here at the Open University. He's part of our OU design group. He might not think it, but sometimes we think of him as probably the leader of the design group. He's the convener of the Design Research Society Education Special Interest Group. And his main work is on the pedagogy of design and creativity, embodied cognition in physical and virtual environments, and theories of design knowledge. And I think I do have to give a bit of a shout out for his new book, Studio Properties, A Field Guide to Design Education. This is available online as a free download. But please, if you could buy a copy, that would be great. And I also have to give a shout out for him that he's a UK National Teaching Fellow, and you won't be surprised, it's with respect to his work in design education. So please let me welcome Derek Jones to the stage.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Yeah, job done. That was embarrassing. And slightly inaccurate, but that's okay, don't worry. So tonight we're going to be talking about visions. Not the kind of mystical visions, although sometimes it might go into mystical visions. I'm interested in how we actually construct dreams and ideas, if you like, of the future. As James said, I'm part of the design group, so I'm really interested in how people come up with ideas, how people create futures, if you like. And the Open University is nothing if not the imagination of a future. So this is the kind of question I'm going to kind of come back to time and time again tonight. It's where did the vision for the Open University come from? And in doing that, I'm not defining what vision is. Hopefully we might even come across some different notions of what vision might be. So there's going to be a bit of a story tonight. This is, what shall we say, it's semi-academic, which is a thing I've just literally invented right now. I'll explain what that means a little bit later on. But let's start. Let's go back in time a little bit to the 29th of July, 1969. Now, you're about to hear Geoffrey Crowther, the first Vice-Chancellor of the Open University, and there aren't any subtitles to this audio. We'll put subtitles online, but it's important to listen to the audio here if you possibly can. I will describe it afterwards, what it is that I'm actually looking for, and it has a bit of a bearing on what we're going to be talking about tonight.
This is the Open University. Many men have tried, and with indifferent success, to define a university. I shall not add to their number. But we are the Open University. And it is fitting that I should try to outline on what that claim is based and what we take it to mean. We are open, first, as to people.
Okay, I won't go too much into that, but did you hear it? Did you hear the poetry, the rhetoric there? We are the Open University. You hear the slight stress in the word open, the slight pause afterwards, even the cadence, the way he sings that sentence. You know, Crowther knows his poetry, he knows his rhetoric. And this is him landing on one of the core visions, if you like, of the Open University. He's really good at it, actually. He's quite good. He even gives a little bit more detail. Eventually, Crowther talks about us being open as to people, places, methods. Even the kind of plummy accent, the way that he comports himself, even the type of language, it looks a little bit different compared to today. But basically, this is still one of the core visions of the Open University. Actually, until very, very recently, this was what it was at the bottom of the web page. Open to people, places, methods, and ideas. Ideas were added a little bit later, because obviously no ideas happened before 2015. But it's only very, very recently, and I'm still not sure as to why, that this has actually been removed from the front page of the OU. That's something we're having a wee look at just now. But this is central. You know, ask anybody who works at the Open University, or sometimes students who study at the Open University, this is one of the big mantras. And for those of you listening online, if this is your first time with the Open University, you will come across this again, trust me, don't worry about it. And it matters. This really, really matters to some of the people that work in this institution. Crowther went on to give a little bit of detail. Being open as to people doesn't really mean very much. It's a bit value-laden, but it's also a bit vague. Crowther went on to end each section of his speech, and I really encourage you to go and listen to the whole thing. It really is it's quite interesting to listen to. It's not very long, but it's a nice piece of sort of rhetorical text, if you like. He says that there are no limits on persons. And he gives a little bit more detail about that in his dialogue. He talks about where there's an unprovided need for higher education, there is our constituency. Okay? So, you've got top-level dream, we are open as to people, a little bit more of a vision, there are no limits on persons, and then a little bit more of a kind of tactical or operational thing here. Where there's an unprovided need, that's where you'll find us. And he does that for each of the three things. Open as to places, there are no boundaries of space. In fact, he very famously says, I'm glad we didn't call ourselves the University of the Air, because even air is too limiting. Okay, you know, context is everything on that one, trust me. Open as to methods, there is no restrictions on techniques. This was at a time when there was still the tail end, if you like, of a technological revolution in the United Kingdom. We'll come on to that a wee bit later on. But these three things, as I say, this is still a really important vision for people at the Open University. It's one of the things that keeps a lot of people here. It genuinely does matter to a lot of people. And as I say, it's still on, or it used to until very recently, be on the front page of the Open University's top line. So there's your kind of strap lines. There are no limits on persons, there are no boundaries on space, there is no restriction on techniques. It's great rhetoric, it's lovely stuff. There's a lovely device going on here, if you like. It's very effective as a way of bringing a whole bunch of different people together round about a vague notion that might actually then lead to something. More on that a wee bit later. These visions do matter. As I say, they still matter to a lot of the staff, a lot of the people that work in this institution, but it doesn't explain where it came from. That was 1969. That was the inaugural address by Crowther of the Open University. And we have to go back a little bit further. And this is where we get to the main part of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. We have to go back another 3 years, back to 1966. And this is where I'm going to introduce you to Jennie Lee, or the Right Honourable the Baroness Lee of Asheridge. I'm not going to lie, I am totally biased. Jennie Lee is absolutely one of my total heroes. And the more I've been looking into the way that she went about certain things, yeah, she's definitely somebody that I would have loved to have worked with, no doubt about it. But way back 3 years prior to Crowther saying we are open to people, places, methods and ideas, Jennie Lee had to present a white paper to Cabinet.
My white paper came out in February 1966, and I had to go before the Cabinet. Well, it was called Comfort Farm.
Don't worry if you don't know what Cold Comfort Farm is. It's a reference to a novel from the 1920s and 30s. Basically what Jennie Lee is saying here, and this is what I'd like you to watch when you look at what Jennie Lee is saying. Try to forget the actual words and look at what she's saying behind the words. Jennie Lee is saying, I went to the Cabinet Office, a whole bunch of men, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Foreign Office, the Prime Minister, all of these really, really big people, and it was a bit of a bun fight. That's what Jennie Lee is actually saying here, okay? So that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping that you're going to kind of pick up on as you listen to what she's kind of saying there. Her reference to Cold Comfort Farm is a bit of self-deprecation. The book is actually about the romanticisation of people who live on farms in rural Fife, believe it or not. It's not the greatest of novels, but it's not the worst of novels either. But it's the difference between what people think happens and what actually happens. And that's going to be a big theme in terms of how visions are constructed. This is it, by the way. This is the white paper. This is the document that starts off the Open University. This is the document that goes, issued by Privy Council, technically, to the Cabinet for discussion. This is the thing that starts it all off. It's an incredible piece of work. It's very efficient text, 3 pages. 3 pages for consideration by government. It's also got an appendix that's got 4 pages, and those 4 pages describe a little bit more detail about the university. And this is it. This is the first paragraph. The government has decided to establish a university of the air. There you go. The paragraph is entitled The Fourth Television Network. We'll come on to it in just a second. But there you go, that's it. This is the type of language that sets up an organisation that's going to last for another 50, 55 years, okay? This is the appendix, as I said, and it goes into some interesting detail. A lot of it's very recognisable. You know, you probably need a vice-chancellor, maybe some toilets. You might need somebody who's going to do exams, somebody who's going to look after curriculum. It's kind of all, yeah, it's all kind of normal stuff, but it's very, very concise. It's very effective. It recognises certain key things. For example, that we will need a certain type of administrator, a professionally competent administrator, because they recognise that this university is going to have to be distributed slightly differently. Similarly with examinations and assessment, that there might have to be some kind of tilt. This is because Jennie Lee's done her homework. Anyway, I'll come back to that in just a second. There you go, 7-page document. What it didn't say, it did not say, we are open as to people, places and ideas. Jennie Lee never uttered these words. In fact, she barely used the Open University as a name sometimes. Jennie Lee had, I'm not going to say a different vision, but her vision was constructed using different devices, okay? So let's have a look at that again. Oh, before we do though, it is important to note, let's go back to the heading of that paragraph. And this is the thing, I guess, that I'm trying to show you tonight. It's not just things like, this is what Jennie Lee says, as opposed to, this is how she says it. It's that I can also see a whole bunch of other stuff in this documentation. Other stuff that I see basically as a professional who has been in architecture for many years, who has run lots of really large projects, publicly funded projects, and I can see the scars in Jennie Lee's white paper. So let's look at this document again. As I say, why on earth is the paragraph that says there shall be a University of the Air, why is it called the Fourth Television Network? This is setting the vision of the Open University. And look how the paragraph ends. Oh, and by the way, it'll be on the ultra-high frequency service on the 625 line standard. Important detail. That's like saying I've got this fantastic dream for a wonderful building that's going to house government and the door handles will be made of brass, I think. It's just, if a student turned up with a piece of work that had this wonderful vision and then a weird specification at the end, well, we'd probably know which course they'd actually studied, Emma. But, you know, you would say it's not really the kind of thing you want to do to an audience. If you're presenting a vision, you want to present the vision. Don't go into the detail if you don't want to do it. There's a reason why it's in this first paragraph. There's a reason why it's here, and it's a Jennie Lee reason. And again, I've done this before myself as well with consultation paragraphs. There are reasons why these little scars, these little details exist in the documentation. In this case, it's actually about funding, keeping certain people quiet, allowing other people a bit of a voice, some political negotiation, and getting rid of 2 or 3 different barriers, believe it or not. We'll come on to that a wee bit later on, because that's what I'm wanting to do. I'm wanting to reconstruct a bit of a story about the history of the Open University from a slightly different perspective. It's a story that listens to the way that Jennie Lee says things. It's a story that I can kind of see as a practicing designer. I can see, I'm pretty sure I know what's going on in there. It's the grey space, if you like. It's how the world really works, if you want to think of it that way. And as a designer, as a professional designer, that is where I have actually spent most of my life. It's in the grey mush in the middle. And it's a hard place to be. It's not that you're creative all the time. It's not that you're doing detail all the time. It's somewhere in the middle. So anyway, here's the story.
I wondered just how far I could, without behaving improperly, tell you something of the inside story. We always start as a kind of hallowed beginning about a speech made by the leader of the opposition then, Mr. Harold Wilson, on September 8th, 1963 in Glasgow.
Okay, 1963. By the way, my apologies. I'll put subtitles on the final online version for everyone if anybody's wanting to catch up on the recording. Jennie Lee was talking there about the first speech that Harold Wilson gives that refers to this notion of the University of the Air. 1963, it's in Glasgow, not in the Brighton Conference, where he starts to talk about the white heat, the revolution, the technological revolution, and so on and so forth, although these things are inextricably related. He's got this notion that there's going to be this thing called the University of the Air. And literally, this is the design journey of the Open University. Step one, it started with a vague and unconvincing notion. The University, I can imagine Jennie Lee like raising one eyebrow, possibly two. It'd also be mostly made of nitrogen then, Harold? I don't know, it'll be just some vague idea that actually had some basis in reality, because he had a notion that there was something happening with respect to technology. There was an absolute drive, an economic need to leverage a larger percentage of the UK workforce to do different things, and there was a desperate desire to educate that workforce, which was expressed in multiple different policies, not just the Open University, but the creation of other new universities as well. So Harold Wilson is putting these vague and unconvincing ideas together. This is the way that Jennie Lee describes it, quite respectfully, by the way.
What the Prime Minister had thought of as a University of the Air. But remember, when a leader of the opposition or a Prime Minister is travelling and travelling rapidly, that a broad concept without having time to study in depth.
How many people have worked for a boss like that, by the way? Somebody that doesn't have time to go into the detail. You know what I'm talking about? Oh, well, it's a great idea. You'll make it big. This bit will be purple, and can you have it for Friday? And then they walk out of the room, and you're left with it. I've been involved in many projects where that has been the client's instruction. Sometimes not even that. So Harold Wilson has got this vague notion. Actually, it's a little bit more informed than that. It's not quite as bad as this. But look at the key phrase here. And Jennie Lee was being actually quite kind in her rhetoric, the way that she was talking about it. What the Prime Minister had thought of as a University of the Air. Jennie Lee spends 2 years, maybe 3 years, working out what the hell he was actually trying to talk about, going behind, finding out the places that he'd been to pick up the clues as to what he was saying about the University of the Air. This is a design thing. This is something you do as a designer. You become a shepherd, if you like, for your client. You're absolutely able to organise your client's vagueness. It's absolutely fine if a client comes to you and says, yep, I want this vague thing. You don't immediately launch into what do you precisely mean by that. You start to shepherd it. You start to work out what is actually happening in here. What is this vision that somebody is actually bringing to me here? But Jennie Lee also knows the importance of starting. She probably didn't turn around to Harold, or maybe she did, I don't know. History is silent on the matter, and say, that's complete nonsense, shut up. She did different things to develop or move it on, because there was a bit of a sense that it was okay at that particular time to actually take ideas like this and try to see whether or not they could be realised. And again, that's another very designerly move. You don't just walk past an idea, you don't just walk past something you observe, you stop and you do something with it. The key to this is Jennie Lee doing this last thing. Jennie Lee does not sit down and say, okay, Harold, no problem, University of the Air, this is what the door is going to look like, or this is what the building is going to look like. She does not design the product. She asks herself, what do I need to put in place to even start to begin to think about what it is that's in his head? That's what she does, is she creates the space to create a project. And that's actually a really, really powerful and quite an advanced designerly move. It's something that's taken me years and years and years to get to realise that what you're actually doing is creating the opportunity for other people to do the work for you, if you want to think of it that way, to help design these things or these ideas that you have. But this is the way that Jennie Lee did it. This is how Jennie Lee set it up. Oh, and by the way, when she says Harold in this clip, she's talking about the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and these British Isles, by the way.
And I should write Harold, but on the same terms as we work together in promoting the arts, that I deal only with you, and I negotiate directly for the money with the Treasury, and you help.
So, this is the absolute sweet spot. I've been involved in about 3 or 4 projects in my career where you've absolutely had access to this. The person who can say yes or no, the person who can actually pay for that, and the person who does something about that. That is the Holy Trinity. That is how projects advance, those 3 things. As I say, I've been lucky to have been involved in just a few of these, and I can see the scars of this. She wouldn't say, right, Harold, unless there was already a relationship with that Prime Minister. They'd been through it on the arts. The way that she goes about things is particular. And look at this too. She's not saying, and you will give me a blank cheque to the Treasury. She is not saying that. She is saying, you will help me negotiate with the Treasury, because she understands that you do not ask a client for more money. You never, ever do that. You put them in a position where they are prepared to pay for it. We'll come on to that a little bit later on. And in government, that's a little bit more subtle and involves different methodologies, shall we say, in design. But this is a bit of a clue as to how it is that Jennie Lee sets up the executive decision-making process for what is going to be a very difficult project, because she knows she's going to have to convince Cabinet, probably the public, a whole bunch of public spenders, never mind the BBC, so on and so forth. She knows what is coming down the line. So she sets this up because she knows that this is a very effective way to go about it. And I can absolutely vouch for that with some of the projects that I've been involved in. Then we move on to the second stage, which is to wade through the swamp of indifference. Now, you'll notice here, starting with a vague and unconvincing notion and wading through the swamp of indifference, these are not formal design methods that you might have come across before. This is more like the reality, if you like, of design in some senses. But this is actually important, because when you have a really good idea, you become energised with it. And you confront people who are not necessarily, perhaps, as enthusiastic as you might be. Let's hear what Jennie Lee says. Just, by the way, when she says he here, she's again talking about the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson.
He found he couldn't get a kind look from either the senior officials or the ministers in the Treasury. He found that among his cabinet colleagues that he himself had appointed, that there was either total indifference or a rather supercilious hostility.
Lovely. Do you hear the way she said that? Supercilious hostility is fantastic. We don't just want hostility anymore. We want supercilious hostility. It's almost like, it's not like Harold Wilson is even being treated with contempt here. It's almost like joking contempt. Because he has this very different idea. And the biggest threat of this idea is actually that it crosses different portfolios across the Cabinet Office, okay? And again, it's the same in a lot of organisations, shall we say, that if you have an idea that is going to leverage, if you like, internal silos, man, the alarm bells go right off. Actually, for me, indifference is far worse than hostility. Hostility is actually really quite easy to deal with. There's loads and loads of tricks and tactics. We can talk about those a bit later on. Certainly when I was working in planning and development, hostility is far easier to deal with than indifference. Indifference, you can't even get a hold of it. It's really quite difficult. And I think this was the worst thing that they had to get over. But the thing about Jennie Lee is she orients to the project. She's action-oriented. And also, she very quickly dedicates herself to this as a project, not to her portfolio, not to her specific role, not to a person, but to the vision of the project. Or let me rephrase that. To the project itself, and then the creation of the vision that would then make that project is perhaps a little bit more accurate. And that absolutely depends on what we are now calling competencies, attitudes and dispositions in design. It's far more about the attitude that you go to a situation with, as opposed to any skills. Skills come into it, but it's that first moment. It's that moment when the client turns around to you and say, I've got this idea for a University of the Air. What does your face do? And having the competence to actually turn that into something that is going to last for 50 or 60 years is quite, it's more than just a skill. And also, Jennie Lee knows the importance of just going, just starting, just doing. She was also in a unique position, and I'm not going to lie, it's kind of like how she organised with Harold Wilson, you know, the power, the money, and the doer, that holy trinity. This was also quite important, that she didn't actually fit inside any particular ministerial portfolio or department. She actually had a bit of a roving portfolio. She also had a bit of a reputation for being a roving portfolio. Her work in the arts crossed a number of different cabinet offices. So she's got a bit of a reputation. She doesn't come from inside one of the silos. She's allowed to do it because she doesn't quite fit inside any of those. And that does actually make quite a difference when you're actually trying to create a new project. It's almost that idea of being an outsider from the inside. Sometimes an outsider from the outside can be doubly bad. I don't know, it just depends. It depends on the context and the setup, but that is actually quite important. So, This is absolutely key to it. This, to me, is actually one of the key turning moments in the whole history of the Open University.
So here was your poor Prime Minister, anxious to go ahead with a scheme which he deeply believed in. But how was he going to, how could he set about it? So I was a kind of last resort. So he comes to me and says, for God's sake, get this thing going.
I'm not so sure that Jennie Lee was a last resort here. I'm pretty sure that Harold Wilson knows exactly what that last statement is going to entail. And it's not about what it says, it's about what is going to happen when he lets Jennie Lee off the leash, when he lets her go ahead and do something with his executive approval and a direct line to the Treasury for negotiation. He knows what is about to happen. And that's actually really quite important. So Jennie Lee is not just an enemy of indifference. This is a way to cut through a lot of these, what shall we say, intransigencies. That she does have a strange position with respect to the existing structures and that there is some kind of line of authority. There's still a lot of work to do, but at least there's a setup there that's going to allow it to happen. So then you move on to the next stage, facing the blank page of uncertainty. This is one of my favourites. I absolutely love this. I used to hate it when I was a student. It was terrifying. You know, you get the project brief, it's your first moment, and you think, what the am I going to do? You've got no idea. You've got no idea what the future is going to be, and you're literally staring at a blank page. And how you make that start is actually really, really important. Let's not worry too much about that particular thing. Let's talk about uncertainty in general, because this is one of the most important dispositions that Jennie Lee
Perfectly properly, they
demonstrated.
wanted to know how much all this was going to cost. And I couldn't tell them. I hadn't a clue. And neither had anyone else.
Okay, again, it's not what she says, it's the way that she's saying it. She thinks that's funny, and she's quite right to think it's funny. Of course you don't have a clue how much this is going to cost. It's a new university. That doesn't mean that you're going to be irresponsible with money. It means you do not know how much it's going to cost. Jennie Lee goes on to talk about Concord, some of the nuclear developments in the United Kingdom. We don't know how much any of this is going to cost. There's no way that you can predict it because you do not know what it is you're going to create. That doesn't mean that you're irresponsible with money. It doesn't mean that you don't know stuff. It means that uncertainty is absolutely fine in some contexts. And this is one of the things that we really, really struggle with, I think, in the United Kingdom, in some spaces and in some organisations. We are terrified of uncertainty, as if it's a bad thing all the time. Jennie Lee was a designer in this sense. It's a thing we're starting to call holding uncertainty. So, for example, the simple example is, if you're running a design project, you need to be completely uncertain at the start. Because if you're certain, that's just engineering. You just need to specify and build. You just need to finish it off. And that's absolutely fine. If it's design, you do not know what it is you're about to do. So you have to have this period of uncertainty, and you have to kind of balance it. Too much uncertainty for too long, it wears a project down, and the costs just get silly. They don't kind of exist. But if you don't hold it for long enough, you don't have a creative enough solution that comes out the other end. Jennie Lee was actually really quite canny at holding uncertainty. She did it in a number of really clever ways that I'm still actually trying to work out myself because I haven't been able to do it myself in practice. She actually planned uncertainty and unfinishedness into the project that she delivered, into the Open University in those early days. We'll talk a bit about that a wee bit later on. Jennie Lee was also an absolute agnotologist. This is the fancy word for somebody who knows what ignorance is and actually studies ignorance. She knows what she doesn't know, and she's absolutely fine with it. Jennie Lee also knows that she's not an expert in adult education, so she brings in experts in adult education. She's not an expert in radio transmission or television transmission, so she brings those people in, knowing that they will do a far better job than she ever will. And she prepares them, buffs them up, gets them ready to go in a particular way that allows them to fulfill a part of her vision for her. She finds others who know how to do the job for her in some ways. The other key thing is that she uses this thing called guiding principles, okay? This is another design concept. It comes from Lawson. And it's the notion that as a designer, because you don't know where you're going, you need some other way to steer yourself or to guide yourself. So a guiding principle is not quite like a condition. It's something that you might apply to yourself and ask of any situation, does this meet my guiding principle? It's easier to show you. This is one of Jennie Lee's guiding principles. It might surprise you, by the way, or maybe not.
What was, for me, of first importance, and that is that if we were going to have a university, there must be no compromise on academic standards. As you all know, that's been my theme song from beginning to end.
So once again, it's not just the words, but look at the way that Jennie Lee said that. You know, her whole perm started to shake. There will be no compromise on academic standards. She was absolutely adamant about this. In fact, this is one of the few things that she's actually consistently adamant about throughout a lot of the paperwork. There's very few, if you like, objectives or aims or vision statements that Jennie Lee makes. This is one of them, that it's going to be a proper university. There'll be no compromise on academic standards. Now, look at the phrase itself. This does not say that we will comply with the Office for Students, SQA, or any other benchmark metrics. It says no compromise on academic standards. That means that you can apply it to anything. As you're writing a piece of material, you can ask, does this compromise academic standards? As you're preparing the administration for an assessment, you can ask, does this as you're going to the toilet, you can ask, does this compromise academic standards? That's the function and the way that a guiding principle works. It's a way that you can keep asking yourself, is this okay, knowing that it will actually guide a project. So rather than having a big top-down frame that says, this is where you're going to go, or this is the shape of the stuff you're going to do, a guiding principle sits inside the project, sits inside you, and you continually use it, and it's a way to actually steer, it's a way to go somewhere. And Jennie Lee was very, very adamant about this, and I could only find 2 others that she was really adamant about. And by the way, none of those were, we are open to people, places, and methods, okay? This was the big one. This is actually central to the way that the university was actually able to, I guess, become successful. We're still absolutely obsessed by people sometimes thinking that we're not a real university. And we put a lot of time and effort into this, making sure that there is absolutely no compromise in academic standards. It's one of the things that I think we should be and are most proud of. Anyway, there we go. So, next stage was that Jennie Lee had to endure and enjoy is maybe in brackets here. You have to wade through the mess of people. And I don't mean the mass of people, I mean the messiness of people. And again, this is true in any project, particularly a large project, particularly a project where you're dealing with multiple stakeholders. You have different people with different ideas. I'll let Jennie Lee put it into the context of a government here first.
Because whenever public expenditure is involved, then it has got to go, it's got to have the sanction of the Treasury ministers. Then it has got to come and it's got to have the sanction of Cabinet. And if there is a consensus of opinion on his side in Cabinet, well, you can go ahead.
So again, this is a little bit of a boring quote, but there's actually a lot of detail in here that's quite important. But it's not the detail of what she's saying. It's actually about, like, Jennie Lee really respects the process of, in this case, what she might call parliamentary democracy, or the cabinet democracy version that you're kind of looking at here. Jennie Lee comes from a very, very strong working class, slightly left position. She understands that you do have to have these points of agreement as you go through a process. And again, it's the same thing in a design process. You cannot do anything without consensus. You can't, as much as you might not want to work with people, you absolutely have to work with people. And Jennie Lee became a negotiator, a dealer, a persuader, a strategist, tactician, all of these things. The stamina you have to have, particularly for some of the big projects. So, for example, some of the big national projects that I've worked on with some practices, you're going for years and years and years and years wanting to get this thing done, and it absolutely saps you. And every single meeting, you've got to be there and completely present and completely focused. And it can be a really difficult thing to do. And nobody teaches you that in design school, in architecture school. But so much of it is about this. Again, Jennie Lee makes use of others to do what she cannot. Again, she was a really fantastic bringer together of people, an enabler of people. Jennie Lee's about to give you a bit of an insight, though, on this top one, because this top one was really important. At this stage of the project, you're still dealing with what we might call a conception. So it's a bit of a vague idea that's got a little bit of flesh and bones on it. It's about to go to a white paper. The white paper is going to present it in terms that other people can kind of understand. But there's still a lot of people that are going, nah, this is just absolute nonsense. So this is what Jennie Lee does. She's talking about some of the most important people in the country here, by the way.
The only man I was after that I hadn't courted. I'd gone after the others one by one. I had a little side table in the strangers' dining room in the House of Commons, a table for two. And one by one they came along. Sir Hugh, Sir Eric Ashby, Roy Shaw. Oh dear, I bet that was a long list. But I went after them one by one because it was a new concept that gives you a quiet opportunity to explain what you wanted to do.
So again, this is giving you an insight into, again, the reality of what you need to do if you're wanting a project to actually land. There's so much politics and so much, I don't know, what shall we say, negotiation with people that's required. Jennie Lee's giving you a bit of a hint as to how much of an effort that she actually put into this. Basically, she spent about 3 years doing this sort of thing, so that when her white paper went to Cabinet, yes, it might have been Cold Comfort Farm, but man, I'm telling you, it could have been a lot worse if she hadn't prepared the ground, negotiated with certain people, made sure that certain other people weren't so much of a barrier, and so on and so forth. Jennie Lee was a past master at this, and some of the names that she's naming here, and again, just the metalinguistics here, okay, metalinguistic, fancy word for the that Jennie Lee says in the middle there. She's almost checking herself because she realises she's starting to name drop. She could have probably went on all night naming all the names with the people that she was talking to. So, finally, we move on to step 5. The thing that Jennie Lee actually comes up with is unfinished. She does not design the Open University. She gives it away, and she gives it away for others to finish. And she has a last foot in this, or a last hand in this. It's actually really quite important. She appoints Sir Peter Venables, the chair of the Planning Committee.
I could have Sir Peter Venables as the chairman, because Peter was there absolutely foursquare. And when any of the weaker brethren wanted to divert its purpose and say, oh, well, let's be so ambitious, don't do this or don't do that, he was there absolutely foursquare. He said, it's not our function to decide what to do. We must decide how to do it. These are the instructions from the Prime Minister, from the Cabinet, and it's to this that we've got to give our mind.
Fantastic. So Jennie Lee knows that Peter Venables is going to continue the project in a very particular way. She knows that she's handing it over to somebody who's going to deliver the things that she's kind of got in the front of her mind and the back of her mind as well. She knows exactly what she's doing when she puts this person in place, such that she can then walk away from the project. She has the stamina to what we call running over the hill. It's that thing in running when you get really tired towards the top of the hill and you kind of slow down, or even if you stop at the top. If you run over the hill, you actually get some free recovery because you're going down with the assistance of gravity, and then all the toxic stuff in your bloodstream actually gets pushed back out because you're getting a bit of motion, a bit of free motion. And in design, it's a similar thing. You've got to run through the end of a project and realise that what you're delivering is actually unfinished, incomplete, and in many ways unsatisfactory, to be quite honest with you. It's something that we don't confront very well as designers. In my last practice, we started actually deliberately briefing this into buildings, actually helping clients understand that what they actually wanted was a bit of uncertainty and unfinishedness at the end. And it helps them economically do something with the new space that they might have. So it's actually quite important to do this. Designing incompleteness is actually a hard thing to do. It's really difficult to ask for money for incompleteness, by the way. But there are other ways to frame it. There's other ways to actually present it. And Jennie Lee kind of knew how to do that. We'll come back to how Jennie Lee finishes it or hands it over in just a second. So, just to recap. This was the actual design process for the Open University. It started with a vague and unconvincing notion, which then had to wade through the swamp of indifference. Then Jennie Lee had to face the blank page of uncertainty, and then endure and enjoy the mess of people, only to give it away as an unfinished thing for other people to finish. That's the real process of the Open University. And to deliver that, Jennie Lee had to be all of these things. And these, to me, are inherently designerly traits. She was a design shepherd, an absolute enemy of indifference, a holder of uncertainty, a designer of people, and a creator of incompleteness. As I say, Jennie Lee would never probably think of herself as a designer, but I can absolutely see it in her. I can see it in her behaviours, the way that she does certain things, and it's certainly the way that we are now starting to teach our students to be as designers. It's to understand that you're operating in a world that is a little bit messy, and it is actually a little bit real, and maybe if your educators were a little bit more honest about that messy reality, then maybe you'd be a little bit more prepared for how to deal with it when you come out of your education. So, this is how we get to We Are the Open University. 3 years before Crowther actually says this, Jennie Lee is presenting a white paper, and it is only then that Crowther can stand up and say, we are the Open University, with pause. And how it came into existence isn't as simple as you might think. So let's flip back to vision again. Remember, we were open as to people, places and methods. This is fantastic rhetoric. It's lovely. You might call this a vision. That's absolutely fine. I've got no problem with that at all. We can talk about that maybe a bit later on. Depends whether 3 of you at least are awake at the end of this. This sort of stuff is sticky. It's like Dawkins memes, if you like. It's really easy to share We Are Open as to people. It's really easy to pass this on. It's kind of meaningful in a non-meaningful way. But that's also its problem. These are also completely ambiguous. They are utterly subjective, and that means that they are completely and utterly negotiable. It means that we can do lots of things within an organisation round about the boundaries of the meanings of these. Visions are basically rhetoric, okay? This is proper Aristotelian rhetoric. This is stuff intended to persuade people, nothing more, okay? That's not a bad thing, by the way. As a designer, my job is to persuade people all the time. It's basically to tell lies and then present to the client the obvious fact that they want to buy this lie. That's it. That is my job as a designer. But rhetoric has a consequence when applied in reality. And this is where the responsibility of designer is actually quite important. Because, much as we might not like it, there are limits on persons, okay? Seriously. You ask certain students in this university how well they do compared to other students, and you will realise there are limits on persons. It's a natural function of a society, of a healthy society. Similarly, there are boundaries on space, and there most definitely are restrictions on techniques that anybody who works in the Open University will know about that. But let's not dwell on that just now. What we're actually meaning to say by these things is on the left-hand side here. We would love it if there were no limit on persons. We would love that dream to exist. But in reality, there are limits, and this is what we're going to do about it. That's the important detail in Crowther's first speech. It wasn't the sexy rhetoric, it was the detail of where there is an unresolved need for higher education, there shall be our constituency. It was actually that detail that reflected the vision that was the vision, if that makes any sense. Because this is the thing, these are the steps down. We are open as to people, there's no limits on persons, where there's an unprovided need, and then down to the end. Anyone who wants to can register for an Open University course. The problem is that the sexiness level maybe goes down as you move from left to right. It's not as easy to share that, but this is kind of what we actually mean. And the joining steps are actually really important. That big grey arrow, that movement from value to vision to goal to action, or there's many other frameworks, by the way. You could use tactics to strategy, you could use a business framework, it doesn't matter. Broadly speaking, it goes from vagueness down to actual thing you can measure, okay? That's your spectrum. Most of it is in that grey space, that design space. That's where the effort is, that's where the vision actually lies, because that's where it comes to life. Jennie Lee understood that, she properly understood that. You have too much dreaming, it's just an idea, it's nothing, it doesn't exist. You can say we are open to people as many times as you want. It won't make any difference in the world until something is actually done. By the same token, if all you do is respond to context, whether it's political, economic, or otherwise, then that is it. That's all you're doing. You're just responding to context. You don't have a vision. There's a famous quote from an architect called Louis Kahn. There's lots of quotes attributed to Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn said a lot of things. But this one I do quite like. Whether he said it or not, I honestly don't know. There's a reason you tell your client, the reason you tell yourself, and then there's a real reason. And as you go down from that notion of vision all the way down to operation, you're lying all the way down, or you don't know what you don't know all the way down. And it's part of this way that we construct realities in our head. And it's quite important, but you have to have a mechanism to check it. And one of the worst things you can do is remove that design space in an organisation so that there is no discussion between the vision and the reality. Or even worse, where you say the vision is still the same, and when the reality is very different, and there's a clear discontinuity between those two things, there is no worse atmosphere to work under in an organisation. I can promise you that. It's very difficult to do because you believe something quite passionately, and it's very difficult to actually operationalise it. And we need to get better at understanding this space. And when I say we, I mean the whole country, to be quite honest with you, because we are seeing this far too much at a national level as well, that it's either entirely dreams here or entirely doing stuff here. And that space in between where we actually ask what's the point of dreams is kind of missing a little bit for lots of reasons. Anyway, I've gone too far into social philosophy there, sorry. Yeah, so this is a notional definition, if you like, of vision just now. And for design, it's a constant bringing of vision into reality. And most importantly, and this is the hard work that a lot of designers do day in, day out, it's not about delivering vision into reality. It's actually about putting reality back into vision. It's the thing, again, that we don't tell students enough about, and it's something I've only recently realised myself in my career. It's actually the 57th meeting or the 59th meeting with a client where it's nowhere near the vision that started, but now I'm actually trying to reconvince the client of something that is now realisable, something that could be done and that is on the cusp of a new vision. That's actually where the hard work is. That's the hard work that Jennie Lee kind of understood, that it's in that space between vision and reality that's actually really important to operationalise. Oh, and by the way, she said it was okay for you to see yourself as a designer. She, okay, maybe didn't use these exact words, but this is where Jennie Lee left off the university. If you see Jennie Lee as a designer, suddenly she becomes a different person. She would always see herself as a politician, as an activist perhaps, as a doer, as someone who made things. And that's absolutely fine. If you see her as a designer, it means you might see her as someone who can actually take a dream and not just run with a dream, but actually then do something with it. It means that you see her as an enemy of indifference, as someone who can actually operate in the world. And if you see that, then you might be able to see that in yourself. You might be able to see that you could think of yourself in those terms. Okay, I'm not suggesting that you need to phone up the Prime Minister and say, you've got this fantastic idea, and if it's okay with him, if he can say nod to it and have a word with the Treasury. It's not about that. It's just about doing those simple things, being a little bit, my apologies, being a little bit more guided by principle as opposed to being guided by specifics or goals or external context. Being an enemy of if there's none of these that you can do, then just aim for number 2. The more you can be an enemy of indifference, the better it is. I promise you. I know it's hard. Oh, I know it is hard, but that's where the hard work of being a designer is. Hold uncertainty. Give it a go for a little time. Just see what it does. It's all right. It'll be okay. And maybe be a bit more of a designer of people. Think about maybe your relationships as something that can actually be designed. I don't mean manipulated. I mean actively tweaked, altered, changed. It's not something that you have to accept. A relationship isn't something that is given to you. It's something you can actually put work into, as my therapist keeps telling me. And also, don't be afraid of incompleteness. It's okay to hand over a bit of incompleteness and to let other people finish stuff for you. In fact, sometimes when we finish some of our design modules, and I'm sure it's the same for other Open University modules, and you see what a student does with it, and it's a completely different thing than you ever imagined. Yeah, these are big moments, actually, for designers, or for anybody who works in this place. So let's go back to this last one. Don't finish it and then give it away, because the last word has to go to Jennie Lee. Of course, the last word has to go to Jennie Lee. This is her talking about how she handed it over, if you like, what the legacy of the Open University is, and how she's handing it over. And when she's talking to the audience not quite in this particular room, but a very similar room back in 1972 or 1973, whenever the OpenTalk was, she was talking to you. And by the way, she was also talking to students as well, because technically, by Royal Charter, every single student at the Open University is also a part of the Open University. It's a little bit more than just being a student. Bet you didn't know that. Look it up. You'll find ways that you can actually become agents in the university as well, and that your voice really, really does matter. And sometimes your voice, just as being a student is the most important thing that you can actually do. You're being a designer of yourself in that context. You're being more Jennie Lee than you might realise. Anyway, this is Jennie Lee. She didn't finish it, and she gave it away. And this is to whom she gave it away. When she's talking here, she's talking to you.
Now, I'm out of it, because it's a cardinal principle that political ministers, whether past, present, or future, must not interfere with the work of an autonomous university. But I hope that everyone who has its responsibility will give thanks to the people who made it possible, and the warmest possible thanks to those of you who today are carrying on the tradition and who I'm sure are just as determined as we were at the outset to see that this is a first-class university, that it's a pacemaker and a trend setter, and that the reputation that it's already got all over the world shall go on from strength to strength.
Thank you very much. The two QR codes and URLs, it's well worth having a look at the library's digital archive. There's some absolutely fantastic stuff on there. So yeah, please do have a look at it. Cool.
Thank you, Derek. Just stay there.
Cool. Okay. Yep.
And we'll see, are there any questions from the audience?
Hello, I've got two questions, if that's okay. The first one is the fourth TV channel she was talking about, Channel 4?
No, in that case, it was actually BBC Two. So at that time, yes. I didn't go back to that, did I? So yeah, that was a slightly interesting bun fight. It's one of the key ways that Jennie Lee actually operated with budget. It wasn't that she asked for money. There was a way to actually leverage how that particular budget or that particular project could then be turned to help support this new University of the Air. And she was a past master at being able to see how these fragmented bits of either project or government or displaced financial vehicles within the operations of government, how she could put them all together. So there was definitely a lot of wangles and a lot of deals done with respect to how that new channel was going to be constituted, how much of it was going to be handed over to this University of the Air. And again, if you look at how much of a priority that took, even with the later Open University, yeah, there's another thing in there that I would recognise from a designer's point of view of over-egging the pudding, shall we say, in terms of the promise there. But it kept that particular pot of money and that particular political negotiation intact for many, many years. So, yeah, thanks for that.
You talked about design space before,
Yeah.
that big grey arrow. The university is obviously evolving, right, and keeping it going.
Yep.
Is there a design space going on at the minute to see how it's going to look like in 50 years, 100 years? Yep. Is there enough space in the university to carry that out currently?
That would definitely be one of the things I would like to probe tonight at some point, or possibly some point in the future. I think it would be really interesting to try to re-energise those spaces, I think, personally speaking. I think we could do with more of those spaces. And it will necessarily mean asking some very, very difficult questions. Because, you know, it's been 50 years since we've examined open as to people, places, methods and ideas. That's a difficult thing to question because it becomes dogma, not rhetoric or vision. It becomes something that's actually really quite ossified. And that's absolutely fine. I've got no problem with that. If we are still adhering to that vision, that's absolutely fine. But I think the issue might come where that's maybe not viewed in some of the operational activity. And you do wonder whether the disconnect there could be reconnected in some healthier way, in some better way. I mean, personally speaking, I would really like to get certain people around the university in a room together to really start to have these discussions. Quite difficult discussions, but I think very necessary and very healthy discussions, because you might see that some different directions and some different visions might come out of that thinking and that speaking and that doing. Yeah.
All right, we've got a few questions from online.
Excellent.
So feel free to raise your hand or I'll keep going through these questions here.
Better not be Dave Phoenix spamming.
No, not yet. Melissa on Facebook, the general design principles you were talking about, how can this be applied to the way we study?
Good one. What do you mean, guiding principles? Yeah, okay, cool. I'm guessing, for example, you might already have a study goal. Like there might be a reason why you're wanting to do something. And it can be quite useful actually to ask yourself, where is that reason coming from? So this is just a really quick and dirty little design method for you. So there's a thing called extrinsic motivation, and it's got the opposite, which is called intrinsic motivation. One comes from inside you, that's intrinsic motivation. That's something that really gets you going. I mean, it's something that is driven by your personality, your upbringing, your culture, your context, or whatever. And an extrinsic motivation is something that is kind of, I'm not going to say forced on you, because sometimes that can be a good thing. That might be an economic motivation. It might be that you have to move house or change circumstances or whatever. So a quick design exercise or quick activity is to work out what are the things inside you that matter, that really, really motivate you, and what are the things on the outside that really motivate you. Now, both of these things can be healthy and unhealthy. Sometimes you can have an intrinsic motivation that, yeah, you should probably go to a therapist about. Sometimes you can have an extrinsic motivation. So, for example, like a desire to change job or an economic motivation. Sometimes they can be shown to be really quite negative because it's almost forcing you to do something and it might contradict an intrinsic one. Here's a quick one. Draw a wee picture of yourself, a wee outline, put some intrinsic motivations, like personal motivations on the inside, put some on the outside, and then maybe pick 2 from the inside and 2 from the outside and try to turn them into guiding principles. Look back at that sentence. There will be no compromise on academic standards. In fact, put that one down as one of your intrinsic motivations, okay? There shall be no compromise on academic standards. There's going to be no Jennie Lee, unless I'm allowed to use it. There'll be no cheating whatsoever. I'm going to speak to my tutor regularly and ask them for advice. But try to turn it into something like that, that kind of describes a little statement that you can always, like you're sitting there studying and you can look up and look at these words, and those words help you move forward. No matter how hard the situation is, those words kind of like keep you going forward. I'll try to write this out a little bit. I'll turn it into a wee activity and we'll stick it online as well. See if we can turn it into something. Is that okay?
You just created more work for yourself. Well done.
Thank you.
If you don't know the answer to this one, I do. So,
Excellent.
Gail wonders, on average, how many students does the OU have in a year?
You go for it then, Katrina.
On average, the OU has around 200,000 students. In 2023, it was 1,999 and students, and then we jumped up to just over 208,000 students the next year. So
Fantastic.
We're going back up.
I was going to say about 190, so that's good, 200,000. That's
You were
nice.
pretty close.
And even with that, 200,000 students, we still get down to a 1 to 20 relationship, that relationship with your tutor. And that goes right back to some of the oldest university models that we have in the UK. It goes back to the no compromise in educational standards. We still scale that right down so that you as an individual can matter. And that's something that is still utterly special about what we do in this institution, really is.
Very good, Derek. Very interesting discussion about how it all happened. One thing which occurs to me is the getting back to the 4th channel idea, which some people thought that it was Channel 4 was originally going to be an OU channel, but perhaps now we're in a position to create a digital university there and having an open university channel, which can actually become an open platform for more awareness. Because at the moment, I think this awareness has been dropping about what the Open University is, since it's no longer on Sunday mornings, and that awareness, I think, could be helped to be resurrected. And we obviously got the precedents for doing it from Jennie Lee said it.
Mm-hmm. This is very true, yeah, and I have been practicing my K-pop dancing in order to, conduct lectures on TikTok. Yeah, it's tough, it definitely is, particularly when you have very, very broad channels. It can be difficult to maintain. In some ways, it's kind of easy if You know, I had to watch the Open University as a kid because I was waiting, you know, for the cartoons to come on or whatever on a Saturday morning. So, I mean, there is something about that that does actually help. But I don't know, I go back to the most effective thing that you can sometimes do is just be good at something, just be really, really good at something. And I think there's something that's stronger about the thing that we do as opposed to the mode within which we do it. And I think if you could mix, well, just what we've been talking about, you know, that 1 to 20 model, for example, you know, that's a direct relationship between teaching and learning. That is absolutely essential. And again, if that's your guiding principle, then take that into these other spaces and not replicate it, but, you know, expand it into those spaces. And yeah, I think there's a lot of success that we could actually have with that. But you've got to take the mindset in, you've got to take the guiding principle in, as opposed to say, let's look at this media and then, well, that would be my sort of starter for 10, and then get a whole bunch of really creative people round about a table to just jam. I was nearly swore there. Sorry, James. Nearly. I didn't. I'm doing well so far. To just jam some ideas round about that, and that's where you can see people starting to come to life when you give them permission, almost, to think creatively round about a bit of a boundary or a context problem. So yeah. Anyway, but that's what I would do.
Okay, thanks, Derek. That was a great talk, and thanks for making us reflect on Jennie Lee's work. And I almost felt she was in the room, which was brilliant. And I almost want to ask the question of, like, what would Jennie Lee say now? But that's a bit ambiguous. So I'm going to head to the guiding principles. And I guess a little bit of a big question is, what does the OU do in the context of uncertainty and complexity it faces today, and indeed the HE sector faces today? How do we, you know, almost 60 years into our life, reshift our gaze maybe to rethink about guiding principles? Mm-hmm. What is the process of enlivening that design space in an organisation that's got so many established processes and ways of working?
Yep.
How do we start to intervene? And how do we also intervene outside as well into the sector, where you could argue change is required?
So there's a really important thing that you kind of hinted at there that I probably should have. I did actually have it in the presentation and run through 27 4 weeks ago. There's a difference there between what the Open University should do, or what vision it should have, as opposed to how it should actually create that vision. And what I think we need to focus on is how we go about it. It's like what you're kind of talking about in terms of process. So, for example, you know, I'm not going to lie, this is exceptional. Okay, Jennie Lee had the ear of the Prime Minister, had the ear of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but organisations still are able to innovate even within existing contexts, within very hard boundaries, very hard financial boundaries. So there are still models to do this. So, for example, you could create bubbles where you do actually have somebody from outside the bubble saying, I give you authority, this is where you're going to potentially leverage or negotiate budgets, and then the Jennie Lee is in the bubble, creating that thing. You can do that through slices, you can have the bubble sticking slightly outside the organisation. You mentioned as well how that might actually then infiltrate into other contexts. That'd be really nice if the Open University could trust one of their Jennie Lee bubbles to actually float away from the organisation and actually go into a different context and ask, how might we innovate in that space, and come back and report. There are loads of different ways that you can do it, no matter how ossified you are as an organisation. There always, always, always are. But it's creating those spaces in the first place, and then giving people the agency and the permission. It's almost like the permission space to do it, not the permission directly. And again, one of those 4 projects I was talking about earlier was at the Open University, and we had that holy trinity. Myself, I'm not going to say I was acting like Jennie Lee, but okay, I was a bit grumpy at times. But we definitely had the authority from a Pro-Vice-Chancellor. We definitely had the budget from a particular location, but we also were able to wangle and negotiate other budgets from other spaces. And that opportunity space allowed something really interesting and innovative to come out of it. We do have the ability to do these things. So,
before we take our last question, can we have a look at what upcoming events are happening in STEM?
By all means. It's funny you should say that, Katrina.
What a coincidence.
Do you want to talk to them, or?
So these events that are on the screen are primarily for new and continuing students, but everyone is invited to come along if you'd like to get to know STEM a bit better. In particular, I'd like to point out the Ask Us Anything. If you join us, you're going to get to go ahead and grill the likes of James here, and our brand new Executive Dean, Mike Fernando, is going to be our host with the most for that. So, our last question for the night, and I think it is a great way to end because it's from a student.
Brilliant.
With dreams versus reality, when it comes to applying it to being a student, I'm sure everyone dreams of a smooth journey and almost perfect results. But how do you advise students to deal with the reality so as to be pleased with our results and not disappointed?
Okay.
Good luck with that one.
Yeah, that is a tough one. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, thanks, James. It is a brilliant question, isn't it? Yeah, would you like to? So, well, again, okay, I started at the Open University, then tried to find different ways to maybe engage with them. There's lots of different things that you can do. How you deal with that kind of learning loop can be really, really, really difficult sometimes. Sometimes you have to confront some hard lessons for yourself, and that is difficult. You know, I can theorise about this using Donald Schoen, destabilised systems and stuff like that, but the reality is, and I've experienced this both as a student at the Open University and as a tutor, you look at the score sometimes and it is absolutely gutting. But so many Open University students pick up from that, they learn from it, and they change as a result of that. And that thing in itself, not the score, but that mechanism, that changes you. And that change is actually part of your educational process as well. I know it sounds a bit worthy and it still doesn't really kind of directly answer the question, but that would definitely be one of my first go-tos. The second one would be to find other networks. You need as many support networks as you possibly can have. Whether that's friends and family, other students, your tutor, might be work colleagues, doesn't matter. These are all potential networks. Go back to Jennie Lee's point about designing people, designing the mess of people. You can change, if you like, the relationships that you have with people. Let them, if you're a design student, bring them into your process. We actively encourage that in design, for example. So yeah, don't feel isolated as a student. I think it's definitely one of the biggest things for me, I think I would say. That's a bit of a vague and unconvincing answer.
Thank you so much.
Okay, okay, all right, oh well. Brilliant. Cool, no problem, Katrina. Cool, thank you. Cool.
Please join us downstairs for your broken drinks.
Cool, okay.
Yeah, I got the budget for you. I know.